This is episode 2 of this 3-part series. Now the first one, if you haven't watched it, make sure you watch it first because it was specking out the land that we're going to look at today. So in the intro to this video, the camera was moving around and there was some snow on the ground. That's because when I was looking at this place, I think it was mid-November. So that's when that was from. And so in this video today, what we're going to do is we're going to go over my farm plan for this farm, kind of explain how I was going to lay the land out, kind of take you through my mapping procedure, which is actually really simple. And I'm sure some people who are maybe a bit more fancy consultants will probably laugh at my system here. But hey, it works. And I've done a lot of projects with this way because it's just so simple. So we're going to go look at this land, kind of explain the economics of it. I'm not going to go full on into the business plan because I could probably go on about that for hours. So we'll just kind of keep it simple, look at the production and look at the way this land was going to be laid out. One thing I want to say before we start is the YouTube live session I did last Friday went really well. And so I want to carry on with that. And so for at least the next foreseeable few months, the first Friday of every month, we're going to do a YouTube live session. That's going to start at 5 p.m. Pacific time and 8 p.m. Eastern time. I hope to see you guys there. And regarding this video, put your questions and comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. All right, let's get into it.
We've got this piece of land that was going to be Green City Acres. The plan was to 10x the production of Green City Acres. In fact, it would have been a little bit more. And we were going to take on a sort of model where we would be selling to some franchise grocery stores and we would be delivering twice a week to a distribution center where we would be selling twice a week to a distribution center. We would actually be taking our product to a shipping warehouse, and then that would be shipped on a truck with cold storage to a distribution center. And I know some people are going to go, Curtis, this goes against everything that you originally wanted to do with your farm. And yeah, you're right. It does. People change, you know. I've seen a lot in my years of farming, and I thought, hey, here's an opportunity. Let's try it and see if it works. The way I see it is like, if food is more local in BC than buying food from California, that's better than buying it from California. So I was exercising the whole idea of really scaling my farm and then seeing where it could go. But we never did it. We didn't buy the land. This land is now sold to somebody else. So none of it matters. But what I want to show you, I think there's some value in it for people who might be thinking about scaling up their operation. Or if you're just curious about how a larger scale farm would be laid out, that's what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to show you what I had planned for this. And the plan I had for this was based on a lot of what I've seen at other farms. So Jean-Martin Fortier's farm, Eric Schultz's farm. I've got a friend named Jeremy Mueller in Eugene, Oregon. Those guys are probably the more prominent ones that had influenced my decision to pursue something like this. But I've also visited many other farms around the world in my career as a consultant, which has lasted about 4 or 5 years. So I've seen a lot, and I've seen what was possible. And, you know, there's so much demand for local or even just like provincial food. People are really interested in that, and the stores are selling it. So that's what I wanted to pursue. So here's the farm in question. We had about 6 acres of production area here. So that's all field. And I'm not going to go over too many of the logistics of this field because we talked about it in the previous video. One thing I'll just mention as a reiteration before I describe my sort of mock-up farm plan here is that our aspect, if we look at the land just straight like this, up and down, this going up was southeast. So it's not perfectly orientated to the south. Some of these neighboring farms, like this one here, is well orientated to the south. All their rows are running east and west, but not this farm. And that's not actually that big of a deal. The only reason that at first, I was really concerned about the orientation, and I'll explain why I wasn't so concerned with it afterwards. But the reason I was concerned about it at first is that I thought for the longest time that greenhouses, if you're in the northern hemisphere, need to be running east and west to be have the widest amount of plastic exposed to the south. But I was incorrect. It's actually... Well, it's not that I was incorrect. It's just that there's more to it than that. You can actually have greenhouses orientated totally to the southeast, and that's actually, I would say, more optimal because you're going to capture more morning light and less afternoon light, and that's actually a good thing because you need more heat and light in the morning when you're coming out of the evening when it's the coldest time of the day, and you need less of it in the afternoon when it's warmed up and the greenhouse is already piping hot. So a southeast orientation is totally fine, and that's why I decided to lay the field out and the greenhouses out as I have here if you look at this map over on the left. Now, first, I just want to explain how I make these things. It's really simple. No special software involved. I just do what's functional and what works for me to get the ideas across. I know there's all kinds of cool mapping software out there where you can draw, and it's, you know, landscape designers use it and stuff like that, and that's great, but I don't need to get fancy. This does exactly what I need it to do. Is all I do to make these kinds of maps is I get my my Google Earth as square as I can like that, and on the Mac, and I'm sure there's a similar thing on PCs, but I go Shift Command 4 and I just take a little screenshot of that, and then that creates a little screenshot JPEG, and then I just drag that into, I use Pages, which is like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Publisher, and I can just drag the image in there and I can just effectively draw on it and put shapes on it. So that's how I make my maps. So let's go and look at the map. A couple things first. Okay, so just quick reiteration. So we're orientated to the southeast, and we have a slight depression in the land. So the land actually is coming, it grades down slightly to the northwest. And so it's not the worst because the grade was really, really slight. Nothing radical at all. But the highest point of the land is this area here. And it's also the area that gets the most amount of sun. Thus, it makes the most amount of sense to put greenhouses there because nowhere in the year is that going to get shade. So here's our... This is how if we look at just orientating our map to the south, so even in the winter time, the sun would be setting over in the southeast here and then be setting in the southwest over there. So that means that in the winter time, you get as much sun as humanly possible. And in the summertime, you know, we got some trees over here, but that doesn't really matter because in the summertime, we get up to 18 hours of daylight. So that wouldn't affect production in those greenhouses in any way. So that's why I decided to put my greenhouses there. And so let's look at this map over here closer, and I'll explain kind of how I had this field all laid out. Okay, so, you know, this map is just made of these little blocks, basically. And I do all this stuff with screenshots. So I'll basically take like a shape. I'll make a shape, you know. And what I actually did was on that map, on the Google Earth map, I used the ruler tool to just measure out how long 100 feet is, and then I cross-reference this to that, and then I make a block that is 100 feet. So I just end up making these little green blocks, and then I just add some text on top of them, and then I take a screenshot of it, so it's just basically one little block that I can move around, and I don't have to worry about the text getting in the way of everything, and then I can just interchangeably stack things around like Lego, basically. And it works, and it's simple, right? I'm sure there's better ways to do it, but it works for me. And it does what I need it to do. So here's the farm. Here's what I had planned, and this farm was going to cost a lot of money. So this area that was the high point of the farm was, in my opinion, the prime real estate. Now the soil on that part was actually the most marginal on the whole farm. Like, it was the worst soil, but it's okay. You can just put in lots of compost. I've been dealing with crappy soils forever. It's not a big deal to build up soil, especially for low feeding vegetables like salad greens. It doesn't take that much. You know, a couple inches of compost on each of these beds would be plenty to keep them producing all summer long. So even on, you know, gravelly sand soil like it was up here. So we were going to put 4 of these tunnels up here. These are 35 by 216 foot tunnels. You might ask, Curtis, why the hell are you doing 216 feet? Well, the reason for that is I wanted this farm to be standardized to 100-foot beds. And so originally I was thinking, well, I could just have a series of 100-foot tunnels, but why have space in between tunnels if you don't need it? Why not just have a longer tunnel? And it's certainly done on bigger farms, so it's nothing new here. These greenhouses were just like the ones that Jean-Martin Fortier uses. These are the greenhouses that they use that are heated tunnels with ventilation and automation, roll-up sides, all that kinds of stuff. These greenhouses cost about $50,000 Canadian each. So they're expensive, but you can grow a lot of product in them. And so that was going to be the prime real estate on the farm. I'll just kind of explain the layout of the farm, and then I'll go and explain what all these numbers mean, because you see economic units on here, you see R6, R8. I'll explain what all that means in a minute. But let me just first describe the whole layout of the farm. So that was my prime real estate as far as location and aspect. So that's where I was going to put the most expensive greenhouses. To the right of that was going to be, and this is sort of the next sunniest area on the farm, was going, and also higher elevation area. So we're going to have a series of 20 by 100 foot unheated single layer poly greenhouses. Now, Jean-Martin uses these greenhouses. These are very common high tunnels. So these weren't going to have any electricity in them, just basic high tunnels, unheated, no fans, no heat, no nothing, just so we could extend crops into the winter. So in these kinds of greenhouses, we're not really planting crops in November in them. You know, these are crops that we would have planted in October, and that would kind of be overwintering and maybe harvesting throughout the winter, and then we might seed them again in February, but nowhere in between, because in our climate, if you seed in November, it's not going to grow unless you have a heated greenhouse with more of a, you know, not necessarily supplemental light, but just basically a lot more heat. So those are going to be greenhouses there. So we've got space in between the greenhouses. Basically 2 beds would fit between the greenhouses with walkways. This is all with 12-inch walkways between all of these beds in all the blocks. And in the middle of the greenhouses here, we could have 2 beds as well, but we wouldn't utilize that area until the summer. That's why they say R2. I'll explain that further as we go through this. And then we had another series of greenhouses here as well. And so basically the whole idea was this farm was going to be year-round. There was enough revenue that could be generated on this farm to do about 1.4 million in sales a year. That's a best case scenario. That's a benchmark to achieve. It doesn't mean that we would achieve that in the first year, but that's basically what would be targeting with production once we had all these areas filled out. So we've got a bunch of greenhouses on the farm. In the center of the farm, this is an old barn. It was actually really good condition. So we were going to refab it to be a big post-harvest area. It was going to have a drive-in walk-in cooler on the south end here. These are basically driveways that would be 12 feet wide, and so we have a main access that people would drive in off the road to the farm, right to the walk-in cooler. So if we had a reefer truck picking up, or if we were delivering, everything is a real easy shot, path of least resistance in and out of the farm. That was the idea there. Big parking lot, because we were planning to run events and, you know, teach workshops on this farm and stuff like that. And I might very well do this farm at some point in the future, but with my life right now, with having a young daughter, and I'm really enjoying family life, I didn't want it to jeopardize that. So that's the primary reason we didn't do this farm in the end. But I'm happy to share this with anybody, and if there's value in it for them, and you want to do this thing, have at it. So from there, we moved out into the field, and these are all standardized bed blocks, 35 by 100. So a lot of people who do, like, I think Jean-Martin does 40 by 100 foot blocks, and that's because he does 18 inches between his beds. I find I don't need to have 18 inches between beds. I'm happy with 1 foot. So that's what we were going to do, was just 1 foot walkways. And so we're going to fit 10 beds in a block. And the plan here was to have a little mini hedgerow in between, so 4 feet wide in between each bed block. So that might have meant that there was a 2 foot wide, sort of slightly mounded and mulched area with perennial crops, flowers, maybe mini fruit trees and stuff like that. And then 1 foot on each side of it would be walkway where we would pile up a silage tarp. And I'm a big fan of using tarps on the farm because they just save you so much time and work. And they also let time do a lot of the work for you, because once you're finished with a block of crops, you can tarp it for a couple weeks in the summer and then let time just cook that stuff off, peel it off. It makes your bed prep a lot easier. I've done many videos on tarps. If you guys want to see those, just put tarps into the search function of the channel and you can see lots of content on that. So the plan was to have everything standardized that way, and we would have 2 silage tarps for every block. So it was going to be a 20 by 100 foot silage tarp on one side and then on the other side, and so on and so forth as we went the whole way down, so that we could basically tarp any group of crops at any time. And then from there, the access points, we wanted to be able to drive a vehicle or a small tractor all the way around the farm and get in and out of any of these particular blocks. And we've got our compost pile or compost area where we would have storing, 20 to 40 yards of good finished compost that we would buy, as well as an area where we would be composting any residual crops from the field. We wanted to have that in the middle of the field so it'd be easily accessible. So the plan with this was to actually use a small tractor. We were still going to do a lot of the bed prep just like I do on my farm now, but we were going to employ a small tractor to do some of the bed prep, as well as move compost or large amounts of materials, whatever those might be, in and out from the center area. So the other plan with this farm was to run it as sort of like a agritourism type site. And this area here was going to be an events field. And I even had further drawings. I won't get into it in this video. We just don't have enough time. But how I was going to do events. And like I said, I might do this again in the future. And if somebody else wants to do this, have at it. So we were going to host events here, weddings, music events. Like this events field here alone is almost an acre. So it was a pretty good size for that. And then I also wanted to have this is a 6 foot path going in where people from the events field could walk into the farm without walking over the walkways between the beds, because that's a little bit too tight to have just tourists walk through. But if you had an access here, that would have been better suited for that. So that was the basic idea there. Now, let me explain the economics of this, at least on the production end. To go into the business plan, we're not going to have time for that. Maybe I could do that in another video if enough people asked. But let's just go over this in broad strokes. So the whole idea here is you see these numbers R3, R2, R8, R6. What does that mean? So if you guys have read my book or watched enough of my videos, you know that I refer to things as far as how we allocate land on our farm as either by rotation or high rotation. By rotation means that there's 2 crops in a bed, 2 crops in a bed per season, and high rotation means 4 crops or more. So they're sort of broad terms. In my recent years of just designing farms for consulting clients and also just furthering my ideas about farming, I've changed the terminology to just R. So there's R and a number, and that means, so like R1 means 1 crop in a bed. At a 100-foot bed, you could make $800. Now that's minimum. And actually, this total production, I think this is the total. So maybe it was 1.1 million or 1.2 million for this whole farm, not 1.4. Anyways, not that important. So R2 is 2 crops in a bed, $1,600. Now, these are super conservative numbers because as you guys would very well know, if you watch a lot of my videos, some of our crops produce like $1,600 on a 15-foot or on a 50-foot bed in just in just one crop. So these are super conservative, basically looking at the average of overall crops over the course of a season, and just kind of using that as a benchmark. So the way I see it is, it's better to plan, hope for the best and plan for the worst. And so that's why I use these benchmarks. And so some people are going to look at these numbers and go, Curtis, are you kidding me? And that might be because you don't know a lot about market farming. These numbers are not really that crazy as far as what growers like Jean-Martin Fortier or Eric Schultz can do. They're totally based around what I can do on my farm as well. And actually, on my farm, because we're smaller and a little bit more lean, our numbers can be higher. So on a larger scale farm, you generally bring those down. But needless to say, they're conservative. So we've got all these R numbers on the farm. And so the R8, which is the heated greenhouses, means that we can get 8 rotations of these beds per year in a heated greenhouse. And that's what I've done before, even in greenhouses on my farm here right now. So this is nothing that I haven't done before. R6, so those beds would be rotated 6 times. So 6 beds at R6 can generate around $28,000 of revenue per tunnel. And so this is how I basically come up with an economic yield or expectation of a farm, is just put things into blocks, figure out how many rotations those are going to get per season, and then use that number as a benchmark for your planning. And so it's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean you're going to achieve that in the first year, but it's a benchmark. It's a target to work towards. And you need to have that if you're going to run a business and you want to have goals to move towards. So, basically with all this, super productive farm that can run year round. Now, the only part of the farm that would be 100% year-round would be in the greenhouses. And even in the unheated tunnels, which are these ones that have the 6 beds in them, those ones you wouldn't be planting and replanting in the dead of winter. You would be planting in, say, October, harvesting throughout the winter, and then you might reseed them again in February, or paper pot transplant or something like that. So we can expect 6 rotations with quick growing crops in those types of beds in those circumstances. But if we were to heat a greenhouse, we could get 8, and sometimes even more. It just depends on the crop. It depends if you're doing transplants or direct seeding. There's variables there, but that's the main thing. That's the basic economics of how we had planned this farm out. So at all these areas here, and some of these areas might have ended up being more than R3. They might have been R4, because we could, the plan was we could put caterpillar tunnels on some of these if we wanted to. But the basic expectation was that these field blocks would rotate at least 3 times in a season. Thus, 10 beds would equal $24,000 of revenue per block. All right, so that is that. Obviously, didn't go into the full detail with the budget and all that. But just to give you an idea, the farm was going to cost about $500,000 to start, with all the greenhouses, all the upgrades to the post-harvest infrastructure. You had to refabricate that whole barn basically to make it post-harvest, insulation. We would have had to put in a sort of a septic tank area to put all the wastewater. There was a lot of costs there. Had to upgrade some of the electrical to get to it, so a lot of expenses there. Maybe in another video, another time, we can go through what some of those budget details look like if you guys are curious. And if you are, let me know. Leave your comments and questions below. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and hit that notifications button that's next to the subscribe button. And one more reminder is still a couple tickets left for the Jean-Martin workshop. That's coming up next week in Hemingford, Quebec. We just sold 3 today, so it's actually starting to sell out. And then I'm going to be in Ottawa on June 24th, so maybe I'll see some of you guys there. Go to theurbanfarmer.co/events to check that information out. All right, talk to you later.